welcome to the Explainer. So, if you've ever felt like your emotions are just, way too big for the room, or maybe you know someone who just seems to feel absolutely everything at maximum volume, well, this is definitely for you. Today, we're diving deep into the really fascinating neuroscience behind the sensitive brain. And honestly, what the research reveals is going to completely reframe how we view highly sensitive people. We're going to see exactly why crying isn't some kind of weakness at all. Actually, it's pretty much a hidden superpower.
Stop being so sensitive. You just need to toughen up. I mean, how many times have we heard that, right? Our society has been pushing this myth for decades. And there's this whole group of people out there who spent their entire lives apologizing for something that was literally never a flaw to begin with. They tear up during an argument, or a commercial, or just seeing a random act of kindness, and they're constantly told they need to grow a thicker skin. Somewhere along the line, a lot of people who cry easily just started believing that their tears were proof that they were fragile. They've been apologizing for a completely natural biological response.
But this brings us to a massive paradigm shift. What if everything you've ever been told about crying is just fundamentally wrong? What if your tears aren't actually a sign that something is broken inside you, but rather a sign that something is working exactly the way it was designed to? Today, we're going to unpack the psychology of people who cry easily. And I'm going to propose to you that this sensitivity, it's actually one of the most sophisticated, highly functioning psychological systems in the entire human body. Okay, let's start with a biological marvel that most of us just completely overlook. Humans are literally the only species on this planet that sheds emotional tears. I mean, just think about the gravity of that for a second. Every other animal on Earth experiences distress and fear and attachment, sure, but none of them cry tears of emotion. Nature specifically built this completely unique emotional expression system into human beings. That's not an accident. That is definitely not a design flaw. It's a massive evolutionary innovation.
So let's dive into the chemistry here, because scientists actually categorize tears into different types, and they are chemically distinct. You've got reflex tears, which exist just to flush out irritants, like dust or the vapor from that onion you're chopping up for dinner. But emotional tears, they are a completely different biological formula. When researchers analyze emotional tears, they find significantly higher concentrations of stress hormones and endorphins, things like leucine and kephalin, which is actually a natural painkiller that your own body produces. So when you cry, you are quite literally flushing stress chemicals out of your body through your eyes. How wild is that?
So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Crying is the reset. It is not the breakdown. When those emotional tears start flowing, your body isn't losing control. It is actively working to restore balance. Crying kicks your parasympathetic nervous system into gear. That's the branch of your nervous system that's responsible for calming you down after a stressful event. Your heart rate slows down, your breathing gets deeper, and your muscles finally release that built-up tension. People whose emotional systems are functioning at full capacity actually detect emotional overload way faster, and they use this built-in reset button to get back to baseline way more efficiently.
All right, let's look under the hood at the actual neuroscience and the architecture of the brain. First up, the amygdala. You can think of this as the brain's emotional scanner. It is constantly sweeping your environment, looking for emotional significance. And when neuroscientists observe the brains of people who cry easily, they find something really fascinating: heightened emotional salience detection. Basically, the amygdala is just way more reactive. It picks up on these subtle emotional textures faster, and it responds a lot more intensely. So again, this isn't a malfunction. Your brain is just dialed into a much higher frequency.
But the amygdala doesn't just work in a vacuum. It connects directly to our second major system, the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is your brain's regulation, planning, and impulse control center. In highly sensitive people, the communication pathway between that emotional scanner, the amygdala, and this rational regulation center is incredibly active. It's like your emotional and rational centers are in this constant, buzzing dialogue with each other. And what this means is that sensitive people don't just feel things intensely, they actually process things with profound emotional depth. They're constantly searching for meaning and actively reflecting on what they experience.
And that brings us perfectly to the third piece of our neuroscience puzzle: mirror neurons. You know how you physically flinch when you see someone else stub their toe? Well, these are specialized brain cells that fire both when you do something and when you watch someone else do it. And in people who cry easily, this mirror neuron activity is off the charts. It's significantly higher, so when you watch someone else in pain, your brain vividly simulates their experience. It does it so intensely that your body actually responds as if the pain were happening to you. You don't just cognitively understand their suffering, you literally absorb it. And this deep, physical empathy, it's a massive biological advantage for social bonding.
Now, if we zoom out and look at the broader population data, and this is based on some really pioneering research by psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron, we find this trait called sensory processing sensitivity. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population is born with this highly sensitive nervous system, and get this, it's a biological temperament found across more than 100 different species. So if you happen to fall into this 15 to 20%, your brain isn't too sensitive, it's more like a high-resolution instrument operating in a low-resolution world. You're just picking up on subtle details that everyone else is completely missing.
So what does all this high-resolution processing actually get you? Well, it leads to really high emotional intelligence, or EQ. In fact, crying signals three major things that emotionally intelligent people do exceptionally well. First, emotional awareness, meaning you notice exactly what you're feeling in real time, no walls, no hiding. Second, experiential processing. You don't just numb out and ignore it, you actively move through the tough stuff. And third, emotional authenticity. You aren't putting on a fake show of composure, you're willing to be seen exactly as you are. Because of this skill set, people who cry easily tend to be total rock stars in relationships, in leadership roles, and they generally have much better long-term mental well-being.
Now, I want to share a really fascinating number that just perfectly illustrates the healing power of tears, and that number is 90. A really cool study out of the University of Tilburg found that people who cried during a sad film actually experienced a massive, significant improvement in their mood exactly 90 minutes after the movie ended. Meanwhile, the people who didn't cry, they didn't get any emotional uplift at all. So crying absolutely isn't losing control. It's a highly active mechanism for processing that literally leaves you feeling better and way more balanced shortly after the fact.
So where exactly does our relationship with crying begin? Well, it pretty much all traces back to childhood. If we look at attachment theory, our emotional nervous system is shaped heavily by how our early caregivers responded to our emotions. Kids growing up in environments where their tears were validated, they learned early on that feelings are safe to release. But on the flip side, kids in environments where crying was punished or maybe mocked, they learned to hide their tears and suppress everything. And yet, remarkably, a lot of these kids managed to hold on to their deep sensitivity all the way into adulthood, which is honestly just a huge testament to their profound resilience.
Psychologists actually use this absolutely brilliant metaphor to describe this kind of childhood sensitivity. They talk about the dandelion child. Now, a dandelion is resilient by default, right? It can grow pretty much anywhere, even in the cracks of a sidewalk. But then you have the orchid child. Orchids require very specific nurturing conditions. If their environment is harsh, yeah, they might wilt. But if they are nurtured, they bloom into something extraordinary. Sensitive adults who cry easily are very often those orchid children who survived. They possess this quiet, persistent strength, mostly because they just never stopped feeling, even when they were growing up in a world that wasn't really built for them.
And this brings us to a really critical distinction that I think a lot of people get confused. Suppression versus regulation. Suppression is when you just shove the feeling down. You avoid it, you build up walls. And over time, that leads to chronic stress, terrible anxiety, and it can even wreck your physical health. Regulation, on the other hand, is when you feel the emotion, you allow it to exist, and you actively discharge that intense energy. Crying is a phenomenal, pro-level form of emotional regulation. The person who feels the tears coming, lets them out, and then returns with a clear head, that is someone who just successfully regulated their nervous system.
All right, so let's quickly summarize exactly what your tears reveal about you. They indicate incredibly high empathy, which is powered by those highly active mirror neurons we talked about. They show strong emotional processing capacity and just pure authenticity. And above all, they demonstrate biological efficiency. Your body is doing exactly what millions of years of evolution designed it to do. Even in the field of grief psychology, the research is totally clear. The people who heal the best from a major loss are the ones who allow themselves to physically process that loss through sobbing rather than just suppressing it.
So, I want to leave you with this final really powerful thought. If you are someone who cries easily, I need you to know you are not broken. You are a higher resolution instrument. You feel deeply in a world that so often rewards numbness, and your tears are just evidence that your heart is open and your humanity is fully intact. So the next time you feel those tears welling up, ask yourself, are you going to apologize for your own biology, or are you going to let your